Babes in Spyland. How now, Sad Cow. Episode 9. Making split-second decisions felt like the moment before death. A lot of things flashed before your eyes, and some of them made no sense. Like the urge to laugh, the sudden craving for mom's lasagna, and regret that Amphibian Queen never got milkshakes back for the time she'd bought all of the hilly-doo out of the vending machines and given it to the tech guys. Agent Amphibian Queen's first helpful thought was to get away from her captor. She could do it in a couple of moves, but her eyes roamed the room, and she saw that not only did they have social, but they also had an ambassador from South America. She couldn't remember which country right off, but she never forgot a face, as well as a Secretary of Agriculture. None of them would be getting away without assistance. The other security guys, along with the SSA agents, were down. She could see a dart sticking out of one woman's neck. Hopefully they were alive, but, obviously, no one would be moving anytime soon. The crowd still crouched low, looking around, wondering what had happened. Amphibian Queen wasn't about to let the bad guys have an easy time of anything. Taking a large breath, she filled her diaphragm, braced herself, and let out a long, shrill, terrified scream. Some people were sympathetic criers. Most people, when frightened, became sympathetic screamers. Some had been gaping at the chunk of the ceiling that now resided on the floor, while others were visibly frozen in the act of cringing back from one of the men with guns. The crowd at large joined Amphibian Queen's cry of panic, and, as one, they scattered. Chaos in a crowd was hard to control, even with guns. Guns actually made people jumpier, so the slightest provocation would set them off. Like someone dangling a treat in front of a pack of dogs, but instead of surging toward the reward, the crowd would back off, and there wasn't much a gunman could do about it. Amphibian Queen's plan worked perfectly. A set of women kept screaming, and one group was good enough to back into the drink table, knocking it over. The sweet smell of alcohol flowed through the room as the tinkling sound of glass hitting the varnished floor filled the air. The crowd shied from that, and the gunmen, and the screamers. The man in charge, at least the one who had fired into the ceiling, stood frozen in indecision. Amphibian Queen felt the grip on her arms loosen as confusion washed over her captor. She jerked one arm free, trying to make it look and feel like a lucky flail, and shoved it into her pocket. Fingers searching, she found the emergency button on her super-secret cell phone and pressed it 3 times. 2 short, 1 long. The phone vibrated, then stayed still and silent. If everything went according to specs, and with the tech guys, one could never tell, the phone should send a signal out as soon as it was able. It would broadcast her mission, location, and allow the tech center to hear everything that was going on. It should also alert Bunnynose that something really bad had happened. Of course, Bunnynose had gone after Lady Cluck, so she might be busy. Less than 10 seconds had gone by since the first shot hit the ceiling, and the leader of the pack finally bellowed a command. Silence! Not exactly original, but the hard, ice-cold tone projected through the room like a winter storm, freezing everyone in their tracks. It was almost comical. Some of the people actually stopped mid-step, heads turned toward the voice, with fear in their eyes. The goon behind Amphibian Queen grabbed for her arm again. She made a half-hearted attempt to escape, but allowed the man to reinstate his death grip and move it to her wrists. He cinched it up, pulling her so close that she could feel his breath on the back of her ear. Good thing her weapons weren't back there. The leader looked around. You will find that none of your electronic devices work right now. He smiled at a man who kept glancing down into his jacket, where he obviously held a phone. A few people drew their own devices from their purses or pockets to check. Apparently the threat of getting shot wasn't enough to keep people from being in touch with the outside world. Amphibian Queen could imagine the social media updates. Dipping cinnamon bears in chocolate. Wait, just got taken hostage by men with guns, LOL. The leader continued to speak. The room is sealed off, and no person or communication will be going in or out until our demands have been met. Who are you? Social demanded. Amphibian Queen had to give it to her. Even with a gun pointed at her head, Social still oozed confidence and control. Although the shuffling of her feet gave away that somewhere inside the diva was a healthy amount of fear, striving to show itself. The leader, Amphibian Queen, decided to adopt Agent Sugarlip's habit of naming the bad guys, and decided to call him Hans, surveyed the crowd. His eyes slid over her, and Amphibian Queen hoped that they didn't know she was SSA. The pool boy who might have recognized her was nowhere in sight, so she had a chance. Being used as a hostage was really, really annoying, and it put Mudd in an extra foul mood, but it might come in handy. Hans lowered his weapon, but kept his icy tone. Who we are is of no consequence. Social seemed to feel differently. You've ruined my party. I demand to know who you are and why you're here. It reminded Amphibian Queen of the movies, where the heroine standing in chains and rags made demands that she get a hot meal or a bath. Social was completely serious, and probably believed in some recess of her mind that the man would do as she said. Hans took a few slow steps towards Social, waving his gun as he talked. You are of no concern to us. By the time he stopped, he stood less than a foot from the woman. He looked down at her like a cat might look at a scrawny old mouse, and shook his head. No, we are not here for you. Turning, he directed his attention to the Secretary of Agriculture. We are here to discuss the main topic of your little gathering. The Secretary, an ordinary-looking man with dark skin and curly brown hair that never quite got combed down all the way, eyed Hans and frowned. The goon who held the Secretary by the arms, all stony-faced and grim, tightened his grip, causing the Secretary to go up on his toes. Still he spoke to Hans. If you're here to discuss our topic, then why are you taking us hostage? Walking toward the table with the scientific equipment on it, Hans answered. We just want to make certain that all sides of the issue are taken into account. The man holding Amphibian Queen turned to keep Hans in his sights, and she finally got a look at the table where another large man stood next to CB, holding a formidable handgun to his head. Other than his hands raised, CB looked unconcerned with the threat of a hole being punched through his skull. Instead, his eyes rested on the approaching Hans, a look of curiosity on his face. Who was CB? He didn't seem to be bothered by guns or death threats. She hadn't pegged him as a scientist. What else was he hiding under that hometown boy handsome exterior? Maybe she would make sure he and Bunnynose got a few minutes alone after this. Bunnynose liked the cool under pressure type. Amphibian Queen mentally shook her head. Now was not the time to be distracted. Hans turned to face the crowd, now fully in front of everyone but CB and his goon. You see, we don't believe that all of the appropriate people were invited to your little party, and since we represent a good portion of the world's chocolate production, we felt it necessary to invite ourselves. Who are you? The Secretary asked. The producers of that much chocolate could only be from one place, and the man with Swiss alliances working for several sections of the government at once could only be one thing. A Swiss mister. The name was only spoken in hushed voices, usually around the soda machine after SSA had busted some secret syndicate or ancient order of whatever. Swiss misters united under their own cause, and followed their own code of conduct. They shared a fanatical love of their country that only lifelong loyal sports team fans could rival. They were patriots. Whispers of Swiss misters floated around like a moth in the night. You might feel the breeze from its wings, but only after it had come and gone, and if you were still alive, then you would count yourself lucky. Most of the planet thought of the Swiss as neutral bankers and businessmen. While that was true, they also had an elite team of special forces that rivaled any other organization Amphibian Queen had ever come across. That must be why the guy at Billy Bonka's had been so hard to take down, and why he'd been able to best Bunnynose hand to hand. Hans leaned against the table. Our government feels that its interests are underrepresented here, and sent us to make sure they get a say. The Secretary must have put a few of the pieces together, his eyes widening in understanding. The Swiss. A murmur of shock ran through the crowd, and a few people stepped forward. Hans raised his gun, staring hard at them. Yes. The Secretary frowned. We understood that SCD had not compromised any of your herds. You heard wrong. The words came out flat and forced, as if Hans had to thrust them through his gritted teeth. He pushed himself off the table and started on a course toward the Secretary. You see, over 60% of our cows have been infected. Gasps of surprise twittered over the murmur of the crowd. The Secretary's jaw hinged a few times. 60%? Either the guy could lie, or he had genuinely been caught by surprise. It could go either way. He was a politician. That is correct. Hans stayed on course until he stood within arm's reach of the Secretary. Why didn't anyone tell us? The secretary asked. Hans huffed. Government feuds are not my problem. I'm here to get results. Results? Amphibian Queen was as confused as the secretary seemed to be. If the purpose of the party was to do tests to find a cure for the sad cow disease, then why the spectacle? Why not just let things play out and allow the politicians to do their usual dirty work? They lived for deals and intrigue. Hans shook his head. We are not here for the result of your tests. He waved a hand back toward the table. I have no doubt that they will be inconclusive at best. Perhaps you will tell those present that there is no cure. This time the crowd spoke as one. In a dozen different voices, the panicked cry of, "What do you mean, no cure?" rose to the ceiling, threatening to break through. That's right, Hans said loudly. That is the answer they are planning to give to you. That man, he pointed at CB, is here to make it seem that this is the case. That's absurd, the secretary said, finally trying to wiggle free of his captor. We are here tonight to pool our resources and try to find a solution to this crisis. Hans leaned down until his face was level with the secretary's. You are not here to resolve a crisis. You are here to make sure that your government makes a lot of money. The secretary sputtered. What? Hans turned around, once again facing the crowd. He shoved his weapon into a shoulder holster and fished around in his jacket pocket. His hand came out holding a syringe filled with a bright blue liquid. Amphibian Queen flinched as he drew the cap off the slender rod of metal. Even with the thing half a dozen yards away and not aimed at her, she felt her knees go weak. You are here to make a lot of money, Hans repeated, holding the needle out for everyone to see. And I am here to make sure that the rest of us have the same research that you do, and that we all get the cure. Right now there is no cure, the secretary said, shaking his head. Oh, but there is, Hans said. He thrust the syringe out to within an inch of the secretary's neck. This vial holds sad cow disease, and if you do not give us the cure, I am going to give the disease to you.